What's up, everyone? This is Ankit from EcoSeco, and I welcome you all to another video. And in today's video, we'll be talking about balance of payment. And this video has been made keeping in mind the IBDP economics syllabus. So brace yourself. We are going to cover some topics on SL. We are going to cover some topics on HL about balance of payment. So one question that comes into mind, sir, this chapter, it comes under international economics. What exactly is international economics and what exactly is balance of payment and why do we need to study it? Look, kids, what I believe is before we start any chapter, it's very imperative that we get to know why we read a chapter, why is it important. So international economics basically covers all the trades, all the deals, all the transactions that takes place between two or more countries. So if you happen to purchase something from your neighborhood shop, that will not be covered under international economics. Why? Because there is no transaction that has taken place between two or more countries. That transaction is merely a domestic transaction. But if you happen to purchase anything online from some other country, then that will be a part of international economics. And essentially, that transaction will be a part of balance of payment. So now that we know what is international economics, now that we know what is balance of payment, let us delve into deeper about balance of payment. So the balance of payment is usually an accounting statement that keeps a track of all the transactions that takes place between the resident of a country and the rest of the world, usually in a year. So whenever there is any transaction that takes place between the resident of a country and the rest of the world, it gets recorded into the balance of payment. Now, the question that might be lingering in your head is, sir, what exactly are the transactions we are talking about? So, my friends, whenever we are talking about importing and exporting of goods and services, whenever we are talking about traveling, whenever we are talking about buying or selling assets, whenever we are talking about donations, even in that matter. So, if you are donating some money to some other country because of some natural calamity, that will also get recorded in the balance of payment. So, the essence here is that whenever some money flows, whenever any kind of money that flows into your country or whenever any kind of money that flows out of your country, it gets recorded in the balance of payment of your country. So in the entire world, we have more than 200 different countries, and all of these countries, they maintain their own balance of payment. The balance of payment lets them know how much money they have earned, how much money they have spent, how much money they need to be borrowed. And sir, what exactly are you talking about borrowing? And that is something we'll figure out later as we move with this chapter. So, like I have been saying for the past couple of seconds, we are recording two different things. We are talking about all the money that flows into your country, and we are talking about all the money that flows out of your country. So essentially, the balance of payment record items of two natures. So all the inflows and all the outflows. So from the accounting point of view, we can say that all the inflows of money are recorded on the credit side. And we can say that all the outflows of money are recorded on the debit side. Whenever you see a balance of payment, all the items will be accompanied by a plus or a minus sign. So if there is a plus sign with the amount, you will get to know that that is the inflow into your country. And if there is a negative sign in the amount, then you will get to know that this is the outflow of payment. So just to simplify, let's say I am making a rough balance of payment account for a country. Here you have the name of the transactions, and here you have all the amounts. In the name of the transaction, things like export of goods, export of services, import of goods, import of services, tourism, all these things are recorded. Let me just skip the hard part and let me move to the easy part. So let's say over here, amount has been mentioned as minus 205. Amount is mentioned as plus 110. Amount is mentioned as plus 500. Amount is mentioned as minus 250. So how will we know if these amounts are a debit amount or if these amounts are a credit amount? Essentially, how will we know if these are the inflows of money into our country or these are the outflows of money from our country? So if the amount is accompanied by a negative sign, that indicates that this is the amount of money that has moved out of your country. That is an outflow of payment, and it is a debit item, and you have written it with a negative sign. If there is a plus sign accompanied, that indicates that it is a credit item, it is an inflow of payment into your country. And yeah, that was about this part. Let's move to this part. So in the BOP stands for balance of payment. I hope I'm not creating a confusion for all of you. Whenever there is an inflow of money into our country, it creates a foreign demand for the country's currency. So let us understand it with the help of an example. So let's say we are in India right now, and there are some investors who are sitting in, let's say, France, and they want to invest some money into the country. So if the investors who are sitting in France, they have decided that they will invest $100 million into our country, into India. So what does it leads to? It leads to an inflow of $100 million into our country. Okay. One more thing over here is that whenever they are planning to spend $100 million that they are planning to spend here in India cannot be spent in US dollars. If you go to Indian market, if you want to purchase something, people accept the domestic currency. People do not accept the international, the foreign currency. So what needs to be done? The people in the France who wants to invest $100 million into India, they need to convert this into Indian rupee. And for that, they will be demanding Indian currency. They will be approaching people. They will be like, I will give you my $100 million in USD. You give me the money in Indian rupee. So whenever there is an inflow of money into a country, there is a foreign demand for the country's currency. I hope I am making sense right now. Just to summarize it once again, whenever there is an inflow of money into our country, it's the foreigners who come up with the international currency and they want to demand Indian currency. Since they will be investing in India, they can't spend in their currency. They need the local currency, they need the domestic currency. And vice versa, whenever there is a debit, there is an outflow of money, it creates a supply of the domestic currency. So just like we talked about how the inflow creates a demand for the domestic currency, similarly, this outflow leads to a supply of domestic currency. Just to give you a better idea, let us assume that I am here sitting in India and I want to invest some money in, let's say, Canada. So I have here in India, let's say, 1 crore rupees. But since if I want to invest there in Canada, the Indian currency won't be accepted in the local Canadian market. So what I need Canadian dollar. So what will happen? I will try to offer my 1 crore rupees in exchange for Canadian dollar. So this 1 crore rupees, which was essentially an outflow of money, it creates a supply of money. It creates a supply of Indian currency that in the market, I am offering people 1 crore rupees in Indian currency. I'm offering people ki take my 1 crore rupees and in return give me some Canadian dollars. So that is the essence of it. Whenever we talk about balance of payment, all the credits, that is all the inflows, create a foreign demand, and all the debits, that is all the outflow, creates a supply of the domestic currency. And just to make your life a little easier, I have like tried to devise this thing. So we can remember it as DOSCID, DOS Debit indicates outflow of currency, it indicates supply. Similarly, credit creates an inflow of currency, it indicates a demand. Going forward, why do country needs to record all these transactions? Countries that record all these foreign transactions because whenever money it flows into the country, it flows out of the country. You are not only talking about your local currency. Instead, many different countries' currencies are involved. And when you try to understand how the movement of these currencies happens, it will help you to construct the balance of payment. So, in essence, we need to understand the movement of these currencies so that we can prepare a balance of payment. And sir, why exactly do we need a balance of payment? We need a balance of payment in order to understand if our country is in surplus or if our country is in deficit. And that is something that I have reserved for later. To know what is a surplus, what is a deficit, we'll talk about it later. So moving on. So in just now we talked about DOSCID. That is debit, outflow, supply. And CID stands for credit, inflow, demand. So whenever we talk about whenever we try to make a balance of payment, we always see items of two different nature. We always see some items are debit, or we always see some items are credit. And just to remind you once again, credit items are accompanied with a plus sign and debit items are accompanied with a minus sign. So whenever we talk about balance of payment, all the inflows of payment should exactly match all the outflows of payment. That is, all the credit should exactly match all the debit. And you might be wondering, sir, why is this that so? Why does all the payments has to meet like match all the inflows? Why does all the debits needs to match all the outflows? So the reason for it lies in the fact that whenever we talk about exchange rate, the exchange rate equilibrium is determined whenever the demand and the supply curve that intersect. So a basic thing, you have a demand curve for the exchange rate, you have a supply curve for the exchange rate. Whenever these two things the meet, you call the market is in equilibrium. So the same thing goes here, because the demand is what you call inflow, is what you called as a credit. The supply is what you called as outflow, what you called as debit. So essentially in this graph you can see that demand is equals to supply, but in reality when we talk about balance of payment, we also know that this demand is nothing but credit, and this supply is nothing but debit. So that indicates that says us that whenever we try to make a balance of payment, all the debits should exactly match all the credits. That brings us to three different accounts under balance of payment. So I hope we are all on the same page here right now. We have talked about what is a balance of payment. We have talked about what are the different nature of items that is recorded on the balance of payment. We have talked about this important cheat code, that is the USCID, which indicates demand outflow. Uh, yeah, it's here, which indicates debit outflow supply and credit inflow demand. So let us talk about three different types of account that we record under BOP. So the first type of account that we record under BOP is known as current account, which usually contains the export and import of goods and services, which contains the income, and which contains the current transfers. Then it contains capital account, which is a relatively unimportant account. That is something that we will also discuss later on, which contains capital transfers and transactions in non-produced, non-financial assets. And finally, the third type of account that is contained in BOP is the financial account, which contains the foreign direct investment, foreign institutional investments, official reserves, and official borrowings. So let us dive into all of these different types of account in detail. So we have just now talked about three different types of accounts that we record under BOP, that is current, capital, and financial account. But in general, each of these accounts can be surplus or it can be deficit, or the balance of payment in its entirety can be surplus or can be deficit. But the entirety of balance of payment is something that we will discuss later on. Let's talk about these individuals account. So whenever we say that the account is a surplus, the current account is surplus, the financial account is surplus, it means that the balance has a positive value. It means that in that particular account, the credit is more than the debit. Credit is more than debit. And whenever we talk about a deficit in an account, it has a negative balance. And we say that the credit is less than debit. So just to remind you all, credit and debit stands for DOSCID. So whenever we say that there is a surplus in a balance of account, we are saying that inflows in the country is much more than the outflows. And whenever we say that there is a deficit in that country, we say that inflows in that country is much less than the outflows in that country. And if you are confused, sir, how do you say that? What do you mean by balance has a negative balance? It has a positive balance. So balance for any account can be found out using inflow minus outflow. So for each of the three accounts, that is the current account, capital account, and financial account, you can find out the balance. And if the balance comes out to be a positive one, That is, your inflow is more, your outflow is less. You call that account as a surplus account. And if the balance comes out to be negative one, which indicates your inflow is less and your outflow is more, it indicates that the account we are talking about is a deficit account. So that was about the two different types. Now let's talk about current account. So previously, I had told you current account records mostly export and import of goods and services. It records all the transactions, all the transfers, all the incomes. So let's talk in detail. So current account includes all the export or import of goods and services, income. Now, sir, what exactly do you mean by income? By income, we are talking about rent, we are talking about interests, we are talking about profits. So you can note that this income is something what we call as factor income. And what exactly is factor income? Factor income is something that you receive after paying factor of payments, after paying factors of production. I'm sorry. Okay, so factors of production are your land, labor, capital, entrepreneur. So if I have a piece of land and if I lend it out to someone, in return, I get some rent. For me, that's a factor income. If I provide my labor services to someone, in return, I get wages or salaries. For me, that is a factor income. If I give out my capital to someone, in return, I get interest. That is a factor income. If give my entrepreneurial skills to my company and in return, I get some profit, that is a factor income for me. So in the current account, you record all the export and import of goods and services, you record all the factor incomes, and you record all the current transfers. So current transfers is completely different from factor income. Current transfers are also known as transfer income. Just like you have factor income, we have transfer income. So transfer income are the incomes that you receive without rendering any factor services, like gifts, remittance, pensions, money aid, etc., etc., etc. So to summarize everything, current account are those accounts in which you record all the export of and import of goods and services, you record all the factor incomes and payments, you record all the transfer incomes and payments. So export, whenever you are exporting goods, it means you are selling your goods or services to other countries for which you are receiving some money. And that money that you are receiving, it has to be in the domestic currency. So whenever we say that there is an export, we say that it is a credit item. Export leads to inflow of money and there is a plus sign associated. And just to remind you, we have talked about whenever there is an inflow of money, the foreigners, they will demand for the local currency. So whenever there is an export, it will lead to a demand for domestic currency. It is a credit item and it will be accompanied by a plus sign. Similarly, whenever there is an import of goods or services, whenever we are purchasing goods and services from some other country, that is essentially a credit item, just the opposite of it. It is essentially a debit item. Whenever we are talking about imports, imports is a debit item. It will have a negative sign. And when we are importing, if I am importing something from, let's say, Canada, or if I am importing something from some other country, from some European country, so in return, I will be supplying my domestic currency so that I can demand that foreign currency from that foreign currency of the country from which I am importing the goods. So just to summarize you, export leads to a demand for domestic currency. Export is a credit item. Export is accompanied by a plus sign. Whereas import leads to a supply of domestic currency. Imports is a debit item. Imports are usually accompanied by negative sign. Imports leads to outflow of money, whereas export leads to inflow of money. So I hope this is clear. Moving on. So I have just told you the current account contains exports and imports of goods and services. It includes factor incomes and payments. It includes transfer incomes and payments. So in total, the current account contains three, four different odd items. But that part of current account where we are only talking about the export and import of goods and services, only this small part, then we call it as balance of trade or trade balance or net exports. You're still getting confused, no? So I have just told you that current account contains mostly three things. It contains exports and imports of goods. It contains export and imports of services. It contains factor incomes and factor payment. And it contains transfer incomes and transfer payment. So this particular part of the current account, where I'm only talking about the exports and imports of goods and services, this particular part is what you called as balance of trade, or more commonly it is known as trade balance or net exports. And how do we find net exports? It is simply exports minus imports. If you remember from our previous discussion, balance for any account can be found out using outflows minus inflows. So that was about the trade balance. Moving on, income is something I have already told you. And whenever we are trying to find out the income, it is always inflows minus outflows. So we always have to remember that whenever we want to find out the balance of anything, it is always inflows minus outflows. So income refers to the inflow of domestic currency into the domestic country for rent, interest, profit from, minus all the outflows. So whatever money we as a country we are receiving for the rent, for the interest, for the profit, minus whatever we are paying in the form of rents or interests or profit, that is income under the current account. Similarly, current transfers, like I told you about transfer income, this is also the same thing, inflow minus outflow. Moving on, when we add up all the items that we have discussed so far, that is the balance of trade in goods, the balance of trade in services, combiningly, this is known as trade balance. Similarly, the income minus income inflow minus outflow, and current transfers inflow minus outflow, it gives us the current account balance, which is very important. Now, this current account balance, like I have already told you, it can be surplus or it can be deficit. When it will be surplus? It will be surplus when the inflow of money into our country is more than the outflow, or when the credits are more than the debits. And we have to understand this thing. Whenever the inflow of money is more than the outflow of money, it indicates that there is an excess demand of the domestic currency in the market. Inflow of money into our country is much more than what we are sending out of our country. So since inflow is more, and all these foreigners who are coming with the inflow of money, who are coming with the hordes of money with themselves, they are demanding the domestic currency. So whenever there is a current account surplus, it indicates that there is an excess demand of the domestic currency. And similarly, whenever there is a current account deficit, it indicates there is an excess supply of the domestic currency. Current account deficit occurs when the inflow is less than the outflow. And inflow is less than the outflow. That means you are making more payments than what you are receiving into the country. And if you are making more payments, that indicates that you are willing to supply more and more of your domestic currency. So yeah, that was about the current account. So in the next video, we will talk about the capital account, we will talk about the financial account, and I'll try to make a series out of it. So that's all for now. Thank you so much for sticking around. I'll see you in the next one.